Welcome to episode 8 of the Mindedness Revolution. Hey, Baron, how you doing?
Doing great, Greg. How about yourself?
I'm doing well.
Happy to be back.
Yeah, very good. Last time you did an excellent job walking us through the basic outline of a Mind 4, sort of multimodal mindfulness of mindedness frame that specified 4 different dimensions. And we're going to start double clicking on some of those today.
That's right. So I was playing with it. I was thinking of so uh mind four meta schematizes, mind three narrates, mind two models, mind one.
Ah, love it. That's a
There's a little compression
boom. That's
stack
a
there, right?
little M compression, right?
Yeah, yeah.
A new M theory.
That's it. That's it. So yeah, so we it's a beautiful thing. We're contextualizing this higher order recursion of looking at information and looking at the schemas in which mindedness is operating from. What and for the huge part of it is like that we've largely inherited or interacted from, right? It's actually like really, in some sense, like the capacity to say we can grow up a little more, right?
Mhm.
As
Nice.
these beings, right? We can do a little further, which
Right.
kind and it's not just a should, it's actually amazing when we learn to
Mhm.
develop these
Totally.
capacities. And so the one we're primarily talking about today is this kind of metacognitive capacity. And so in general, uh, metacognition is even just the vernacular of cognizing about cognition or thinking
Yep.
about thinking, right? So the capacity to look at what we're experiencing, what we interpret, and then to actually say, is this so, right? Or do I
Mhm.
have this right? And to remind us that a few episodes back, we were talking about meta phenomenology and the idea that none of us are experiencing things exactly as they are. We're experiencing what our system has found useful for fitness,
Yep.
for survival and reproduction.
Mhm.
And so when you take something like the ego and think about the structure of an ego and think about thoughts, first pass is, was that system built that's within me, that's part of me?
Mhm.
Was that built to be 100% accurate and truthful and useful at all moments? And the psychology of that is very clear that no, it is not. And in
Mhm.
fact, it's there for fitness. And so, first pass, if you and I are in a disagreement, I'm going to tell myself I'm right. That's not default. That's my instinct, right? It's a whole nother level to actually say, does he have a point? Have I misconstrued something? Let me look at this metacognitive capacity. And so we are using a philosophical term, we're trying to work through our epistemic fallacy, right? This idea, this feeling of knowing. We have a feeling of knowing, and we think it is a reliable indicator of possessing knowledge. And just as we do in science, we're able to say that may or may not be true. Let's test it some more. Let's examine
Right.
it. And so this is trying to do this in a first and second person kind of perspective where we're trying to apply a little more empirical grip to what we're thinking and feeling, how we're relating. And so that is this reminder. We have these mental objects within us, within our experience. We have thoughts and feelings and perceptions. We
Totally.
have projections that we learn about, right, in psychology that
Mhm.
we project onto each other.
Yep.
And all that's running under the hood, unless we pop the hood and say,
Totally.
how's this stuff interacting, right?
That's right.
And so, um, so we, I want to give some examples of that, um, if you don't mind, and then we maybe
Yeah. No.
dive a little more
The
into the calmo.
right. I'll just really quick. As a
Mm,
psychologist who studied reasoning, the you reason and the experience is you're trying to reason accurately. That's your first person. That's the oh, I'm trying to see what's true. If you just peel it back, you realize that you're motivated to see the world a particular way,
mm,
and that and that's almost always happening. Sometimes truth can become a big motive. Often the outcome is very motive in your everyday life. Okay, and so if you want to see this, go to a trial. Okay,
mm,
and you see the prosecutor on the one hand and the defendant on the other. Okay, and
mm.
they're then intersecting, and yes, they may disagree on facts, but man, are they just gripping the entire story very differently. Okay,
Mm.
that's the power of motivation. Okay, And your ego isn't like a scientist generally. It's like a
Mm.
lawyer.
That's
Okay.
beautiful, Greg.
You know, it's like a
Yes.
lawyer. And it has a point. It has your investments and your interests and your influence in mind. And that's what it wants to win and maintain. Okay. So you are positioned in the world to justify your investments and your influence. That's why your default is I'm right. And by the way, I think nature blinds us to those in some ways to make it seem like, of course, we're right. So we're focused on the truth dynamic, but we're a little blind to what's really gripping us. So if we peel back the hood, oh wow, you're like a lawyer, and be able to, like, one metacognitive ability is really good. Is like, how am I like a lawyer? Right?
Mm.
You know,
That's
what is
awesome.
my position? What's my motive here? What am I trying to get? And how is that influencing my reasoning?
That's actually a great point. I mean, it actually would require, I mean, everybody has some degree of metacognition, or most people, and then some just innately, or maybe they were trained by their parents to be that way. So, speaking of my kids, they're in lots of trouble because there's a lot of metacognition going all over the place over here.
Hmm.
Um, but to actually make that um, decision, do I just want to stick with letting my ego be the lawyer? I love that, actually, Greg. Or do I actually want to train it to be a little more scientific and truthful, not just protecting my position, but I actually want to try to understand what's more accurate and that will then update my position,
Lovely.
right?
Exactly. That's right. The job of the lawyer is to win. The job of
Yeah,
the scientist, and sometimes you need that for sure. But let's be aware of it. And sometimes it's like, just winning,
that's it.
just in the small, narrow, egoic, protective context is probably
Right.
really. There's a larger world out there than just winning. Right.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It kind of plays with the type of game you're playing, right? Are you playing the short term fixed game, win or lose, and this is the only game that matters versus a kind of larger infinite game or sustainable
Right.
game, long game that it's not just if I win this battle, but we're going after the
Totally.
long
And
game. Yeah.
just remember, if you're an adult, just go back to high school when you're 14, right? It's sort of like,
Yeah.
and that felt like your world, but in retrospect, right? In retrospect, you
Yes.
can really see the radius of the light cone of the 14-year-old isn't the universe, it turns out.
That's right.
It
That's
feels
right.
like it when you're 14,
That's
but
right.
in retrospect, no.
And to say that's happening now.
Right.
Whoa.
Whoa. Hold on. Oh, you mean I don't have the universe light cone now? Right. Oh,
Uh,
that's actually an eternal. My
yeah.
eschatology user is such that I will never have that. And okay, now I'm a little bit humbled, and now I'm a little bit. I've got my perspective, and to hold that with being okay. Mm.
That's right. So I guess I would even play with a little bit of the, um, do I want to let my ego be the lawyer or more like a scientist? There's kind of I would say social and personal reasons. So a social reason is like, hey, I actually just want to try to operate at more accuracy. I'm cool with using critical thinking, statistical thinking, um, and that is almost like a less limbic, like a more of a cold, cool rationality. But then there's like the emotionality, the our psyche, that can really pay when we let the ego stay as a lawyer, and goes down a pathway. So let me give you an example,
Mhm.
and I bring this one up with students and residents. I find that most people can readily identify with this one, but one of the concepts that I was discovering for myself was not feeling good enough. Greg, have you ever heard of anybody saying they just don't feel good
You
enough?
know,
Like, am I not good enough?
I had an office and people came and talked to me about their problems. And
Right,
it turns out this sense of like, I don't like myself, or I'm not who I wish I was, and I can't get over that. Is a
right,
conversation I've had a couple of times, Baron.
right. So even within my own exam, so I want to give an example of the self one and then a relational one. At a self level, I would notice first pass, I'm stressed. I'm stressed. And all I knew is like, I'm stressed. Right. And then the next, and people could come in unexamined. I'm stressed. Okay. So what's going on? And then I go, what am I stressed about? I'm like, I got too much to do. And then I'd say, why do I have too much to do? Or if I were using a calm MO, why does he have so much to do?
Mm.
Why do I have so much to do? and to look at that mechanism. And there was a part of it of interest. There are things I want to do, and I'm one of those motor people, right? I'm always going and
Mhm.
doing. But there was also this other emotional symbolic meaning of if I'm doing more stuff, then more in examining this, right? That if I'm doing more stuff, more people will need me, more people will actually say perhaps good things about me, right? And
Mhm.
so, and you do good things, you do good work.
Yep.
And so people, when you do great work and you're working with people, they give you more to do, right? So then
Totally.
you do more and you're doing a great job, right? So then I would see the cycle, right? So then I'm doing more and more and more, and
Mhm.
eventually there's less and less for myself or my family or whoever.
Yep.
And so then I'm getting stressed, and then guess what? You eventually, I saw the mechanism of then eventually I'm not good enough, right?
Mhm.
Because I've put so much on the plate, I
Mhm.
can't actually do it all. So now I truly don't feel good enough.
Yep.
And wait a minute, my own psyche is the one creating this construct.
Mhm.
It's being a lawyer. You're not good enough, so let's
Yep.
make sure we find a way. You're gonna on a conscious level take a pathway of doing a lot of good stuff. Hey, why don't you become an internist and a psychiatrist? Go get a master's of science in clinical research. Get into everything possible. Make sure you feel good enough, right? And to
Totally.
actually see the game being played within
Yep.
and saying, in this case, there was a very emotive reason to recognize not, where this sense of not feeling good enough could go back and even look at where did it feel from? And I could feel
Yes.
like this, like, 6 or 7 year old in me. I can feel him now, right?
Yep.
And not feeling good enough. What those mechanisms were about, things that were maybe said to that kid, right? And so being able to take that capacity now and say, this is a part. So we can metacognitively look at thoughts and feelings, perceptions. We also can look at ego parts, right? And say, here's this part of me that didn't feel good enough. I see more where it came from. I'm going to learn to love and embrace this part of myself.
Totally.
Nobody else could make him feel good enough, but I can.
Mm. Nice.
I
Right.
can. And
Yep.
then that
Yep.
changes what the world is. It changes the dynamics that project on other people. It changes the type of activity I do. Big
Totally.
game changer. That was a great reason to be more like a scientist than a lawyer
Lovely.
related to my ego, because it changed,
Right.
made me a better person, and better
That
engaged in the world.
that brings up so many different points. One super important point is that you have a super ego. Okay, this is what
Mm,
Freud. Okay, the super ego is the internalized persona that then becomes the lawyer against you, at least relative to
mm,
some expected standard that says anticipatory personas, meaning the people out there are going to judge you, and internalize this to get their love and acceptance. You better be this way, and then you carry that voice around with you. Okay, so the lawyer gets
beautiful.
turned against you as an internal critic, a parental critic figure that's judging you based on some projection of an audience. Okay, and
Beautiful.
and then to be loved. So for me, here I'll just very briefly say this is
Mhm.
how it relates in me. Oh, I'm going to develop this big unified theory, right? And I didn't set out to do this, but I did, and then I feel like I did, and then you get this sort of, well, wait a minute, I'm going to give a presentation, say this is 2005, on defining psychology at the American Psychological Association, and you know how many people showed up? Five.
Yeah.
Okay, and then down the hall, Zimbardo or whoever's giving a talk, and you know how many people are there? 500, right? And then who's in my head? My dad. Well, like, are you a real expert, Greg? I mean,
Mm,
are you
mm,
really the expert here? I mean, if you're really expert, why are 500 people in your room, right?
mm.
And is this really just some need you have to prove this? Is this really about you proving it as opposed to what it is? If it wasn't, why wouldn't more people be here? There's that, and that is a very accessible
Yes.
conversation in my head
Yes.
that I think has parallels to what you're talking about as well. So there it is in
100%.
us, kind of wandering around in terms of the way it grips us and frames us. It has a developmental history. Certainly for me, the dad voice is quite strong in terms of my
Hmm.
dad was a professor and sort of conventional views about, well, who's the expert, things like that. So
That's
there it
right.
is. That's.
So, so it's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that, Greg. Um, I think that the other point I would make about what we just did, right, is that we both like self-disclosed like this vulnerability and this feature of our minds that we were able to explore. Um, whether the umbrella of like a metacognitive view, call memo would be a more precise articulation of this, but that we did something that actually exposed vulnerability. And why would we do that? Because that always, usually, almost always feels terrible, right? People hate to go into their vulnerability, and yet, what do you notice for yourself when you're able to kind of go there and look at this, right? What do you
Totally.
any comments you'd have?
Yeah, as long as it's held, right? As long as it's
Mm-hmm.
held, um, then all of a sudden you've opened yourself. There's an opening,
Mm-hmm.
right? As opposed to a closed. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
so so when there's, at least in you, you have a defensive system. Okay, that justifying system needs to feel justified, and the vulnerability is the first anxiety. It says maybe you're not, and in the
Mm-hmm.
wrong. The reason that's the case in the, if you are in the high school world and you show up short in a competitive gossip environment, you get shamed. And I have been
Mm-hmm.
shamed in high school. I got shamed in high
Mm-hmm.
school a couple of times. I know what that's like, and that's what my fear is. Later
Mm-hmm.
down the road, if you're lucky, you realize that, damn, the world's more than high school, right? If you're lucky. Many people
Yes.
don't. And then
Yeah.
when you're actually able to get in contact with the vulnerability with love and openness, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and not be consumed by it, you know, the shift between, oh my God, that's a monster, it's going to eat me and I better fend against it, to, oh, that's a part of me. That's an aspect of me that I share with actually many people in the world. And if I could share with other vulnerable people, of course, this is group therapy or therapy in general, but group therapy in particular is this place where people come together. It's like, oh my God, we can let the persona down a little bit and be seen for
Mm-hmm.
who we are and still be seen, known, valued, actually, that to be able to held through that. In fact, the great humanistic insight is like, if you can be held in all of that, wow, that's a totally different, cool way of being in the world.
That's right. Right. So it in a sense, it's like willing to go into some painful type of experiences, because on the other end of it, if it's held and processed and metabolized, there's an opening, as you said. There's a deeper freedom, a psychological and emotional freedom that in itself can become self-reinforcing, right?
Totally.
So I've noticed in myself as like, and in a sense, us being able to talk about this and talk about this quasi publicly, it speaks for how there's a different relationship to the ego. So I have an ego. I'm not my ego. I tell people like I have a hand, but I'm not my hand. And if
Love
I
it.
said I was my hand, you would think something's wrong with
That'd be
Baron
a
and
little
must help him
weird.
out. But we all walk around saying we're ego.
Totally
And to
love it.
actually say it's okay to actually broaden that a little bit. Sometimes I am identified fully with my ego. Sometimes I am fully immersed, and sometimes I'm not. And sometimes
Totally.
I actually can examine this. And sometimes I can see how this ego is acting like a lawyer. And as you said, maybe even working against the system as a whole. And to actually say, let me apply more of a scientific, examinative, more of a calm MO type of strategy. And that will initially actually feel worse too. But then it, on the other end of that, it feels amazing. Like,
Right.
and then you're becoming a psychologically healthier human being. Is that of any value? Is that any value to yourself, others of the world?
Huh, who would have thunk it? Psychological well-being?
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
that's it.
It's one of the values I hold.
That's it.
Uh,
So I love that one. There is this sense of we can learn to do this ourselves. We can learn to do this between each other. Not uncommonly, people will benefit learning or modeling with a therapist,
yep.
right? So we're both like psychologically minded and have psychological
That's our
training and stuff like
professional
this.
training. Yep. Mhm.
Um, so yeah, um, I wanted to mention another example for our audience, and I bet some people could identify with this one too. Is that okay to give another personal?
Please, yeah.
Yeah. So this one involves my wife. So when she hears this at some point, we'll say, I'm assuming she'll say, "Yep, that was spot on." And this was actually why I started in. I was in med school, and for folks not familiar, it's like at least historically, it's like attaching a digital or information hose to your mouth, and it's saying drink as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
I
no,
didn't
I
find
know a
any
couple
of
of
it.
people that went through that,
Yeah, I didn't find it particularly hard in terms of the content. It was the volume. And all of a sudden, I was in a place where I didn't have time for myself and others. And at the time, my girlfriend, she's my wife now, but the girlfriend, and I was trying to negotiate how do I have time for myself, for my friends, my girlfriend at the time, and school. And it was absorptive. And my wife and I would find ourselves in an argument, same argument about this was about time and allocation of time and
Mhm.
who's where. And we're like duking it out. At some point, we're just like duking it out with each other
Yep.
over and over. And then
Mhm.
something happened.
Mm.
Probably, I don't know how many times we had this argument, but something kicked in, a type of relational call memo kicked
Mhm.
in and said, what is happening? Like,
Mhm.
what is happening between us? There's like the stuff we're talking about.
Yep.
What is happening between us? And so
Lovely.
we were both doing this, right? And the things come up of like, I'm feeling controlled by you.
Yep.
And so owning, I feel I am having the feeling of being controlled by you.
Mhm.
Who's saying that? We're both saying that. We're
Mm.
saying that to each other.
Mm.
And then we're like looking. So this kind of metacognitive
Mhm.
frame, I always like to think of it, there's at least, if you have two people talking, you at least have four going on. You've got
Mhm.
like the two people there and the two, at least the ones you're projecting onto each
Mhm.
other.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. So in that moment and that power discussion,
Mhm.
right? Who did, who did I feel like I was actually talking to?
Mm.
Who did she actually feel like she was talking to?
Yep. Lovely.
And we were able to nail exactly, right? So I felt like I was kind of talking to my mom, and she
Mhm.
kind of felt like she was talking to her dad,
Mm.
related to our own dynamics, and as any kid does with like power and control and
Totally.
with parents and stuff like this. And so we would get to the point where the argument didn't immediately go away, but there was a huge, profound insight. And then when it would start, we would shift gears and be like, I'm not your dad.
Mhm.
And say, I'm not your mother. Like
Mhm.
to try to just shift that projection and then to then look at what was the original argument about
Yep.
use of time. And now we're able to look at it more, dare I say, objectively, but we had less stuff that we had covered on top of it that would otherwise just be under the hood. And we just
Totally.
have the same argument over and over. So that's hopefully an example of when couples or people can do this between each other, it really elevates the level of authenticity and capacity to engage each other and to actually deal with the difficult things, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
Life gets hard. Wait till you get the real difficult ones, right?
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful example. And I really like this point about that it takes place between people. Okay. And we see this in couples. You have different parts of you. So the whole lawyer, the internalized lawyer, a guy by the name of Eric Berne updated Freud's id, ego, superego, and turned it into, oh, there's a child, there's an adult, and then there's this parent.
Mm,
And you may have heard of internal family systems, listeners may have, which is really like you have these different parts of you that are trying to manage different things and they compete. So
mhm,
the idea that there are that have different positions they're trying to justify and investments and influences they're trying to realize, that's both within us and between us. And then you get negatively neurotically reactive. And by that I mean
mm,
like there's a trigger and it bugs you, and then all of a sudden it's transparent. You have access to a particular way of responding within yourself or between, and then boom. Okay. And that's a loop, folks, within couples or within yourself. And I would argue that psychotherapy, if there's anything that we can really say psychotherapy does, it shines a light on these tendencies of these different parts that loop, and then they get reactive loops against each other, entrenched. And those are maladaptive because actually shit happens. Okay. And then you feel a particular way, and then you react to it in a pretty, an understandable way historically, but it just makes it worse. That we call a neurotic loop. Okay.
mhm,
And what do we do about that? Well, if you're reacting like through a transparent automatic way, you're not being very mindful,
Hmm.
right? Mindfulness is about meta recursive, like, oh, what's happening? What's happening between us? Can we stop
Hmm.
and see the flow between us at a process level? Okay. And then wonder about that. What's driving that? Oh, actually, I'm projecting my mother onto you in a
Hmm.
particular way, or it might be at
Hmm.
least in part, right?
Hmm.
And this, folks, this is what a mindful observer, a metacognitive observer, the MO in COM-MO is this shift in relation, and then to open up lots of different possibilities for seeing what's happening. And then when you see what's happening, the landscape opens as opposed to the stuckness in which you're looping.
That's beautiful, Greg. Yeah, so there's all the way from you could use Calm MO and Common Core psychotherapeutic approaches, right, in a more formal system. You could look at this as a, more of a metacognitive frame or a psychological mindfulness that you're cultivating as a practice. And then we're also taking the leap in saying this is a feature of Mind 4 that beings operating and trying to cultivate their Mind 4 or trying to become more metacognitive. And it's not because it's a should, it's not a super ego, make yourself better than other people. That's a problem, right?
Well, that's a
It's more
lawyering.
of that's more
Lawyering.
lawyering. It's like, no, I'm actually trying to be more accurate. I'm realizing my system is advancing more fitness rather and short-term survival than long-term well-being for myself or other people. So I'm shifting my perspective of I want more of a longer term well being for myself, others, and the world. And so I'm willing to investigate. And it's initially kind of painful and sucky. But then on the other side of it, it's actually really liberating and free and it feels amazing. And then we have the capacity, perhaps, to show up in the world differently, right?
Totally.
What happens when you engage people that you know personally or professionally that have some metacognitive capacity, right? It's a
Yep,
total different interaction.
totally. I'll give you a basic architecture for this from a psychological perspective, which I know you know, but just for listeners, okay?
Mhm.
And so what happens is for people is they get these vulnerabilities. They're bruised by life and they know they have these sensitivities and then they're basically defended against them. Okay, like, oh no, this is gonna pull me back into depression, or it's gonna get me rageful, it's gonna remind me of this injury. I can't. This pattern's gonna happen. So then you get this defensive avoidance, okay? And I'm going to try to be in a way that keeps me from situations. And the fear, because it happens in the past, is as you try to avoid this, if life sticks you and you think about it a certain way, eventually this will flip and you won't be able to, you'll find yourself in it. And then you'll be, oh no, and you'll be totally overwhelmed by it. Okay.
Mhm.
And then you become all of the emotion. And often you may actually respond impulsively or excessively and create more problems. Okay. Extreme. Right. And then to tell,
Mhm.
see, I told you. And then you try to jam it back in the closet. So what you're actually doing is you're living through an over controlled emotion that all of a sudden floods you and becomes under controlled. And then you resent the impulses that you do. And you try to get yourself back into the head. I got to control this. This we call misguided
Mhm.
control. And it actually
Mhm.
makes you more fragile and vulnerable. So when you find yourself in this, what we're trying to do is we're trying to flip this into what we call the emotional sweet spot. Okay,
Mhm.
so the emotional sweet spot is when your person head is able to see your primate heart and be aware and attuned to what it's telling you on the one hand, and being
Mhm.
able to accept and bring that onto the field and be like, oh my God, I did screw up here and this is really painful, or X, Y, and Z is really happening. How could I hold that? What does it tell me feeling wise? But also adaptively regulate that for your short, medium, and long term values. Okay,
Mhm.
because if it, so then you hold that, and this metacognitive observer in part allows you to cohere with the ego, the persona, and your core experiential self, and to create a complexified whole. It integrates
Mhm.
and differentiates as opposed to this fragmented, vulnerable, fragile system. And that's why
Mhm.
people will say, wow, I just feel much freer right afterwards. I
Mhm.
feel kind of whole and freer. It's not like it went away, and it's not like I don't deal with pain anymore, but it's just somehow it's part of me now, as opposed to a shadow dragon monster that I'm terrified of, and I'm trying to get my, character armors and all day. I gotta protect against this. No, actually, it's holding this in a particular way, being part of it, but also adaptive regular and integrating it across the stack, and ultimately a effective, a mindfulness. That's what it affords, and that's healthy psychological flow. And we can use examples like with the body. It's like when does an inflammation happen, and does it fight against itself, right? And it's like, oh God, that's not adaptive, right? That's an allergic reaction. Well, how do we have healthy reactions that metabolize the feelings in a way that creates a complex integrated whole, as opposed to this reverse? And really, that's what it's about. And so it's not magic, but if the frame is put on it, I think in a way that makes good sense.
I love it, Greg. It just a side note. If my mom or father-in-law listens, I'm not blaming you for my problems.
Right.
It's
I'm
more of
same with my
taking
dad.
ownership.
Listen. Right. Exactly.
Taking ownership of the schemas operating within me, right?
Totally.
And learning when they're being activated, learning, as you said, kind of various types of antidotes to this kind of neurotic loop, right? By shining the light on it, being able to hold it and integrate these things. Yeah, it's beautiful.
So, the last thing, and most people will know this, but just in case folks haven't listened to me, I do want to say calm. Okay. There's the MO, that's the meta observer. That's what we've been talking mostly about. Okay. But the calm, it means one thing, and that's like different from negative reactivity. So calm is comfortable responsivity as a word, content and able to be comfortable in the world, as opposed to negative reactive. So those are polars. And then we can break calm into its components, which are the attitude we're trying to cultivate: curiosity and openness instead of closeness and rigidity, acceptance instead of rejection, okay? Loving compassion instead of critical judgment, okay, and hostility. And then finally, motivated toward valued states of being instead of an attitude of can't cope, no hope, and helplessness. And we can really see the narrator as somebody who's worked with depression, anxiety, this critic. That's what I sort of did the acronym down here. It's understandable. You get narrowly, John would call it a reciprocal narrowing. You see the world, you grip it a particular way, you hate, you're frustrated, you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? And things didn't work out. And gosh, Greg, you did get your PhD. I didn't, right? And I work with, well, it's easy for you to say, because look what I am. And then that thing grabs and narrows, and watch people transform from, oh, I can see myself gripping that, and I can let go of some of that and hold some of the injury, grieve what I can't recover, and then get in touch with that, and then be like, actually, Greg, you're going to die and I'm going to die. and in some ways, we're both pathetic humans. Yes, you get my message. Woohoo!
Yeah, that's right.
And it's okay. Oh my God.
It's okay.
That's a miracle. So anyway, curiosity, acceptance, loving compassion, and motivated toward value space. These are the embedded attitudes for psychological mindfulness, Lisa's CalmMO. Because basically the issue is flying a little CalmMO flashlight on your neurotic loops. That's one aspect of this Mind 4 structure that we're trying to lay out here.
I love it. And Greg, I've actually been I work with residents, psychiatric and internal medicine, neurology residents, and students. And so I've been using more of the CalmMO in terms of their training and tripartite model and maps of mind. This actually starting to become feel more practical for people too. And then obviously with patients, so I do mostly Mind 1 firmware upgrades or updates or modulation, but we'll run across that from time to time. And it was just like maybe a couple weeks ago, I was working with a gentleman in the inpatient setting with depression, and we were talking about CalmMO, and he says, well, I think I'm up to the CAL. So the curious, accepting, and loving. He's like, I got to work on the motivated part, right? Yeah.
Right. Well,
so I'm finding people as you test out things, being quite receptive to this. So I find it interesting.
Yeah, that was pretty similar to when I was doing more teaching than I currently am. The CalmMO idea spread pretty quickly through the program we were in. People can grab I think, it's packaged in a way I think people can grab a hold on, and then it unfolds in a way that leads to kind of productive insights and utility.
Yeah, I've heard you say sage mode, right? So that would be another way people coming out of listening to this. It's like, hey, we're talking about cultivating this sage mode that can turn the light upon yourself. Look at these
Totally.
neurotic loops. You have them. Just own it. Okay, it's like you have knots in your shoulder. Welcome to the human civilization. This is where we are, and to learn to work with these things rather than them working on you, right? Rather than you being an instrument of these schemas in your mind, you're learning to consciously cultivate your agency so that you can show up in a more authentic way. You can see things
Totally.
within yourself more accurately and within your relations of other people, the things you're projecting onto them. As you learn
Uh-huh.
more of that, you're learning how people project onto you, and they have less grab, right? And you're able to kind of
100%. Right.
come
Right.
into this
Exactly. I
more
love what you
authentic.
said. So yeah, we try to teach. It's okay that you have neurotic loops, right?
Mhm.
And then some people, especially, have sort of depressed. Oh no! Of course I do. Like, well, okay, then
I knew
yes,
I
it's
had
okay
that
you do
too.
that, right?
God.
It's like, and then it's like, well, what's right relation to your neuroticism? Well, COMMO, and really just first the meta cognitive stance, because the neuroticism is a reactive
Mhm.
transparency problem. That it's the
Mhm.
default. It drops you into your sort of default automatic way of responding, whatever has been ground into you by procedure, habit, and defense, right? And then you become aware of that, and you shine the light and open up new ways of thinking. So, and this then we're say is one of the four pillars of Mind 4 is this capacity to be a metacognitive observer. And COMMO gives one frame. There are a lot of different possible frames, but they all, just the whole world of psychotherapy, they all basically, let's see how we see the self gripping the world and
Mhm.
how you're thinking about stuff that matters to you. And can we loosen that some a bit, get relationship to it in a way that's healthy in the moment, healthy going forward.
I've got one more question about that. So, Greg, does that mean once somebody has intellectual insight about metacognitive processes and calm MO, and maybe even some initial breakthroughs experientially, does that mean they never react again, or I've figured out all my schemas at this point?
Absolutely, Dr. Short. I've never reacted in a way that's problematic ever since it happened to me in 2004. So, no. Okay, so
Right.
no, I'm still a primate. I'm still an animal. I'm still an
Hmm.
organism. So in other words, I'm carrying up for me. I'll speak, and I think for you also.
Hmm.
I can certainly give examples over the last week. Okay.
Hmm.
So for me, the issue, and maybe people certainly, I'm not saying this is universal. I'm pretty clear from what I've seen. Yes, and I will say though this is that I will not be in a neurotic loop very long. Okay, without having immediately a COMMO awareness that I'm in a neurotic loop,
Hmm.
or having a strong reactivity. And basically, what's available to me now is like, when do you want to turn this light on? Right?
That's
When
right.
when's the time to shift? Because I do. Mossy and I occasionally will yell at each other a little bit. We'll get annoyed. That to me is first order emotion, negative emotion. It's totally fine. As soon as I get that way, that light is ready, available. It says, when is this going to be maladaptive?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's holding that I think that you sort of develop, or at least that's where I've settled into. So I have them. I have issues. I go in fact, we have Monday. Void darkness day to feel like shit because negative feelings
Hmm.
are there and negative situations happen. So certainly they're there. You're gonna hold. Speaking for myself, hold neuroticism. The value is that this is available to me. And it really puts a basement on how long I'm going to be in a place without shining on. Going to available to me when I can say, okay, now is the time to kind of shift out of this. Is about becoming a looping, and now let's shine the light on the loop.
Beautiful. Yeah, there is a dimensionally dynamic feature. It's not a categorical. Once I
Right.
have learned some metacognition and calm MO, I'll never react again. Like forget that, people. In fact, but to your point, you will the same triggers become less triggering to actually extinguishing. But guess what? You're a human being, you're changing. You'll have new ones. You have new ones when you have kids and things like this. Your parents get old. These things like change these dynamics, but now you have a new toolkit to how to
Right.
work with it. And to your point, you don't like stay in it as long and things like that. If you're I don't know about for you, but for me, I have several people in my life. You don't need many, you just need like one or two that like you calm MO with them. You're like,
Totally.
you realize, dang, I just said some stuff to some people and I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure you're not in your own, it's like having the capacity to say, I'm still transparent. I'm not fully, the schemas
Love
are
it.
blurry. And I go, can you help me? And so you have some people that you trust and love, and they love you, and you know they're going to give you compassionate feedback on that, right?
Beautiful.
So that's another way you would know somebody is
Totally.
metacognitive. They're strong enough to
And yes, you would
find that
definitely
relationship.
hope to have that. You know, if you're going to have a transpersonal view, it's good to connect with others, right?
That's right. That's
And
right.
get other positions,
That's
and
right.
for sure. So that's lovely, and that's true for me too. And definitely knowing when to turn it on, light on, knowing when to go to others, be there for others, and have them be there for you for sure.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
All right. Well, we've laid out the idea of Mind 4, and now we've made one of the core components of that, a metacognitive observer, and that can give forward psychological mindedness. Kamemo gives us one angle on them. There are many, but I think we've given folks a sense of what that's like. So, thank you, man. You're
Beautiful.
building the architecture about why this matters and why it can help us individually, relationally, and hopefully across a wide variety of different domains.
To our future, right? Our future wisdom
Woohoo! Go
together.
ahead. The
You know,
revolution continues.
that's right.
All right,
Awesome.
man. Take care.
Well,
See you
thank
next
you,
time.
Greg.
Yeah.
You bet.